Welcome to your year 2021 Zodiac forecast. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd be honoured if you'd subscribe to my channel. Now I'm going to provide a penetrative insight for each of the 12 zodiac signs, so please stay with me for that. But just to say, if you'd like to ascend beyond your zodiac sign, which is just based on the location of the sun and how the planets interact with that, and find out what this new year will hold for you as an individual, there is nothing more accurate and telling than a personal forecast. Now you can get your 12-month personal forecast for 2021 plus a character analysis for 30% off, a special offer. Please see the link below. But also know, if you order in 2020, I'll give you the rest of 2020 free. So if you order in October, you get October, November, December, plus the following 12 months. Now your zodiac forecast is going to be of great interest to you, of course, and it does give us a fascinating insight into what we can expect. But of course, the zodiac or the horoscope contains much more information than just our sun. And that's where that personal horoscope comes in. But also, as we start each year, we have a solar return. And I want you to think of that solar return at midnight on the 1st of January 2021 as like your personal birth chart. It gives us a blueprint of what we can all expect collectively for this new year. So I'm going to share that information next. But when I go into your zodiac forecast, I'll be sharing different wheels, the different eclipses, to give you a really big opportunity to get a feel for what's coming for you. But astrology is basically the study of time. And when events happen in the past, when particular planetary alignments occur, when we look forwards to see when those alignments will happen again, it gives us a bit of a clue of what we can expect. And the fascinating thing, of course, is that as 2020 came to a close on the 5th of December, Saturn moved back into Aquarius. It had been there from the 22nd of March to the 2nd of August, 2020. But it moves from the cold sign of Capricorn, which it governs in its dignity. It's the sole ruler of Capricorn. And it moved into the sign of Aquarius, where it's the co-regent, along with Uranus. Now it was joined on the 20th of December by Jupiter. And then on the 21st of December, they came into a conjunction. And that conjunction is still there. It's not quite exact, but it's still there as we begin this new year. Now, what we can learn from those past events is that the last time this happened was in fact in 1405. So a very, very long time ago, and that was on the 7th of January. And I think what began at that time was the Cultural Revolution, in a way. So what we can expect this year is a revolution, that's for sure. And of course, we were seeing elements of that revolution beginning last year. And part of the revolution can be evolution. It doesn't always have to be turbulent, but there are certain parts of what happened in 2020 that were, of course, very turbulent. Now, the conjunction that goes between the planets of Jupiter, which is about expansion and growth and optimism, and Saturn, which is about resistance, obstacles, boundaries, tradition, usually happens just under every 20 years, about 19.8 years. This is because Jupiter takes 11.8 years to go through its cycle, and Saturn takes 29.5 years to complete its cycle. And over the last 1,000 years, predominantly, the three signs that this conjunction has occurred in most of all are of Sagittarius, Capricorn, and Pisces. So that's what makes this Aquarius conjunction so absolutely blindingly exciting. Now, it's also true to say that the eclipse cycle that we welcomed in on the 14th of December 2020 was the Saros cycle that is featuring the polar axes of Sagittarius and Gemini. Now, that began on the 30th of May 1984 in the sign of Gemini with a solar eclipse. And if we look back to when eclipse cycles begin, that gives us a big idea of what they may bring in their wake. So that one had Saturn and Mars conjunct in the sign of Scorpio, very much to do with finance, but also to do with desire, could even say lust. But Saturn, of course, is about discipline, it's about those structures, and Mars, certainly in its second home zone of Scorpio, is very much about desire. So you can see that a certain amount of repression would come from that particular conjunction, but also the potential to work very hard on resources. And I think in terms of the material world, there's been a lot of development since 1984, and some people would argue a lot of growth. But on the other side of the heavens, where the eclipse occurred, not only did we have the solar eclipse in the wonderful, quick-witted Gemini, we also had Venus there, which is very flirty and alluring and attractive. But we also had Chiron, and that is the wounded healer, and that was conjunct the North Node and Venus. So for me, this pattern that we're beginning this year, or picking up the thread of, which has been rejuvenated by the solar eclipse in Sagittarius on the 14th of December, which forged an amazingly positive angle to Mars. So I think we're all going to be feeling a lot more hopeful as we come to the end of this year, because last year, 2020, was just so terribly trying. I think we are going to have a much greater sense of momentum, a much greater sense that something is shifting and moving in our consciousness, our way of being. But I think that gathering of energy back in 1984 in Gemini was really a lot to do with the way society has changed since then, not just in a material sense, but also in a social sense. So we've seen a mass transformation in the way we consume information, the media, which has come through the internet, and of course printed media has declined quite sharply, but they're very much governed by the sign of Gemini. So we could say that Chiron, the wounded healer, being in that part of the situation in conjunction with Venus, points towards a wound in what we believe in. And I think with that energy all clustered together based on universal central time in the 8th house of transformation, very Scorpionic itself, and Mars and Saturn in conjunction in Scorpio, we have had a lot of lust since 1984, and we have had a lot of challenges to ideas, because if we go back to that time, I think there was much more of an orthodox that most people were expected to fit into. People have found their voices, they expect to have their voice. Now on the other side of the heavens, with the solar eclipse that occurred on the 14th of December 2020, Sagittarius energy is about the higher principle of communication. So it's about philosophy, it's about the intellect, it's about history, travel, it's about borders. It can be about laws and regulations, but it's very much to do with trying to find the higher principles of society. And because it forged an amazing link with Mars, I think both being fire signs, after the really pulverizing difficulties of 2020, which saw the end of an eclipse cycle between the axes of Cancer, which is ruled by the moon, so that's very much to do with emotion, the family, security, the seas, the waters, if you like, and on the other side, the harsh, cold reality of business, big industries, and materialism in perhaps its most extreme form, which has battled with the need to find emotional security on the other side of the heavens in Cancer. So we've had this big battle going on over the last couple of years, which has really been very difficult. And I feel that obviously there are some institutions, some business strands, some countries which will try to withhold or to hold on to power in a very oppressive way. And on the other side of the heavens, we had the moon is the repressed emotions that have been held down for a long time, especially to do with civil rights and people speaking up much more ardently about what they want. So the Sagittarius energy that is coming along, which re-evokes that first 1984 eclipse in Gemini, when this Saros eclipse cycle began, is very much about communication and information. So this year we're going to see a lot of sharing of ideas, that's for sure. And of course, we're seeing a lot of polarization in people's viewpoints and a lot of outspoken expression of ideas, and sometimes not enough tolerance. So that's an interesting principle. So as we come into this new year, although Saturn is the co-ruler of Aquarius, and of course it was co-present with Jupiter over the last year as Jupiter made its way through the sign of Capricorn, where of course it's not at its best, it's in its fall, and we've had a fall in the stock market. And also if we look back to when Jupiter and Pluto were last together, that was in 2008 in Capricorn, we had a fall in the stock market. If we go back to that eclipse cycle beginning in 1984, guess where Jupiter was? Yes, in Capricorn. And guess what happened that year? Yes, we had a fall in the stock market. It wasn't perhaps as quite as catastrophic as 2008 or perhaps even 2020. And that might be because when Saturn and Mars are together, particularly in the sign of Scorpio, which is very much about marshalling investments and pensions and all the rest of it, I think that Saturn was probably a stabilising influence, and all that Gemini stuff was in the 8th house of business anyway. But the Dow Jones did shrink 4% in 1984, so we can see as Jupiter makes its way through Capricorn every 12 years or so, it's not for the best when it comes for finance, investment, business generally. So as we come into this new year, Jupiter and Saturn are together and they are still co-present, and some astrologers would argue therefore that because Saturn is the co-ruler of Aquarius, the traditional ruler, that some of the more cool repressive energies of Capricorn will still be to the fore. And they could be right. But for me, I think it's more about detachment. So what we're going to get over the next 2.25 years as Saturn makes its way through the sign of Aquarius is the Aquarius energies of kindness, of fairness, of truth can be melded to the more reserved nature of Saturn. So, for example, home working is very Aquarius, which has come about more because of COVID-19. It's very Aquarius, very independent. It's using technology, which Aquarius also welcomes for its modern ruler of Uranus. But in actual fact, I think it's going to lead to a lot of creeping isolation. I think people could kind of start to see that the world could become a kind of dystopianly detached place, which is not necessarily quite the utopia that people talk about for the Aquarian age. But that's where Jupiter can be a modifying influence for the cooler energies of Saturn. And I think the two together, as we turn into this new year, are going to be for the good. So this year is going to see Sagittarius and Gemini eclipse energy, apart from one lunar eclipse which will occur in the sign of Taurus. But what's really important is that Neptune, the planet of dreams, is going to be impacting all of these eclipses and also the North Node as we go through the whole of this year. The North Node is the kind of emotional direction of travel or society. It's in Gemini. It returns to 1 degree Gemini by the end of the year. But of course it's an air sign, just like Saturn and Jupiter begin the year in. So that airiness can be there, but that watery, eroding energy of Neptune can provide distortion. And I think the thing that's really going to be at stake this year, just as much as it has been in recent years, is the whole concept of the truth. You know, when we've got big media platforms saying it's not their role to govern the truthfulness or accuracy of what people say because everyone is entitled to an opinion, we're heading into really dark territory in my viewpoint. Traditional media, even if you're not a fan, has to live to certain parameters that come from regulation, even if sometimes they have stepped outside of it, probably quite often. But there is some regulation in place, whereas a lot of new media doesn't have any regulation, and that means that truth or facts get distorted to suit particular people's agendas. And I think we are going to still continue to have a lot of that in 2021. Now, the other thing that perhaps is not quite so well known is that although Jupiter will like being in Aquarius, and it is going to be much more expansive than it has been in the sign of Capricorn, it's not going to stay in Aquarius for the whole of this year. It's going to move mid-May into the sign of Pisces, and it's going to be there through to the 27th of July. Now, Jupiter, in fact, is the ruling planet or the co-ruler of Pisces, so it's returning home. And so that's an interesting one, but it does start to go into retrograde from the 20th of June for 4 months. So I think we might see a revival initially in the cruise industry by the middle of May. We might see bookings starting over again if COVID is coming back under a bit more control, as I believe it will. But I feel that once that retrograde begins, it is going to be very interesting how that affects the cruise industry. And the other thing I need to tell you is that in astrology, when we take a particular point, like that solar return at the start of the year, we get a map just like your personal horoscope. And that solar return, I've created it based on universal central time. And the ascendant is actually in Libra, which is very much about finding balance. But the midpoint between the sun and the moon's in the sign of Leo as we begin this new year, and the sun will be in Capricorn as usual. So the midpoint between the two is 21 degrees in Libra. So this is going to be very much a Libran year. And 21 degrees Libra is quite a fascinating point, because it is going to be next to, or very close to, a fixed star which has the characteristic of both Saturn and Jupiter. And that fixed star is called Foramen. And Foramen is very much to do with journeys, particularly sea journeys. It's said to be broadly optimistic, but it can see passages from quite tumultuous events to much more enlightened understanding. And that seems to be where the world is at the moment. We have an opportunity to change how things are, but just finding a vaccine for COVID is not the answer. Many of us won't take it. And of course, many of us don't want to be ruled by fear, so we're going to carry on our lives. So it's an interesting fixed star to have on that midpoint, but also the midpoint is ruled in terms of the 12th harmonic, or the Dward, by the sign of Gemini. So, you know, I'm talking about this Saros eclipse series being very much to do with the polarities of Gemini and Sagittarius. Gemini, quick wits, communications, sharing of information, and the higher energy of Sagittarius. Now, like all zodiac signs, I'm not talking in terms of your zodiac sign or how you live within your zodiac sign, because we all have a choice to live to the best of our zodiac signs, or there is a more base instinct within each zodiac sign, and everybody has a choice. But this year predominantly is going to be about finding balance, it is going to be about communication, and it is going to be about trying to find a search for truth. Now, I mentioned before, what did I say for 2020? Well, the midpoint was actually in Aquarius, and it was conjunct Venus. And Venus in Aquarius is very much about us as a collective. And also it was in the 4th house, which is about our sense of security. But we also had Neptune conjunct the moon as the solar return began for 2020. Quite incredible. So the Neptune in the sign of Pisces, which it governs, conjunct the moon. And Neptune is very much about gases, infections. It can be about uncontainable situations. It can be about distortion. It was also potentially very much about spirituality. It's about healing. But having that conjunct the moon for the world collective, where we all found out that wherever we lived in the world, we were all connected to the same issue like never before. That's quite extraordinary. And the other thing that all astrologers knew, of course, was that we had the posse in Capricorn of Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto. So most astrologers believed that there would be a crash in the stock market, so we weren't wrong about that. But the implications of this infection, COVID-19, very much was there in the stars. So this year, you can see that Neptune energies are still going to be very important, and that potential for distortion or dishonesty, perhaps from politicians particularly, it can be to do with how information is shared on social media platforms particularly, but it can also be to do with our imagination, or that we have choices about the way we want to live our lives. But Sagittarius generally is very much about travel, and I think the travel industry will get revived this year, but I think we're going to see changes. So we're going to see more temperature tests at airports and ports. We may see some very quick COVID tests being enacted, which will give very quick results, and we'll start to see more and more travel picking up. It's a fact, because people don't like to be contained. And Sagittarius energy is about adventurism. It's about being very independent. And last year was very much about being locked in, which was very uncomfortable for many of us, because above all else, Sagittarius energy is about individual freedom. So this year is a very, very exciting year. It does give us an opportunity to bounce back. It's not going to be without big challenges. We do have a very pressing right angle between Saturn and Uranus, the two rulers of Aquarius, which is going to go on to about the 31st of July. It comes back from around about the last 5 days of November to the end of the year. And that's a really difficult aspect, I feel, because Uranus, of course, is in the sign of Taurus, and that's very much to do with resisting change. Taurus likes continuity, whereas Uranus likes to shake things up. So our attitude to the earth, environmentalism, how we live, how we consume, which Taurus energy is very much about as well. It's what we enjoy eating, drinking, spending our money on, bit of luxury. All of us love a bit of luxury, but that's being tempered by this potential new world order that Jupiter and Saturn initially are bringing in the sign of Aquarius, plus that solar eclipse energy that really came in with such a hurtling ferocity in its wonderful trine with Mars on the 14th of December. We've had Venus moving mid-month December into the sign of Sagittarius. So it's a much freer, looser energy as we come into this new year. But stay with me now to get the inside track on your zodiac sign, because I really feel that this is a year that we need to be informed about like no other. Welcome, Libra, to your in-depth, deep dive year 2021 video. This is for the Sun or the Ascendant. Just to say, if you would like to ascend above your zodiac sign or ascendant and embrace your personal blueprint for year 21, you can do so by ordering your forecast and character analysis, and get 30% off by seeing the link beneath this video. Don't worry, if you order in 21, you'll get 12 months from the time of the order. If you order in 20, you'll get the rest of that year free, as well as the full 12 months of 21. This year is literally going to be like a breath of fresh air for you. This is because the sign of Libra is an air sign, as you know. It's also cardinal, so you're very much a leader sign too. And if we take the midpoint at the time of the solar return for us all at midnight on the 1st of January, it shows not just the Sun in Capricorn as normal, it shows the Moon in the sign of Leo, which is lovely and warm and affectionate. But if we take the midpoint between the two, and therefore the balance of what this year's energies will be based on universal central time, it means the midpoint is in Libra. It also means the ascendant for this year is in Libra. So this gives you an enormous opportunity to really actualize your individuality, your creativity this year. But it's not just that. Your ruler, Venus, is in the sign of Sagittarius at 20 degrees. Now it is tempered by a little bit of a potentially draining link with Neptune, which is in the part of your horoscope to do with being of service and to do with your physical vitality. But Venus in the sign of Sagittarius comes on the back of the solar eclipse, which occurred around about the same point on the 14th of December 2020. And that was a reactivation of a Saros series of eclipses, which first began, as I said before, in 1984. So the last couple of years are seeing a big kind of celestial war going on between the watery Cancer and the very practical Capricorn, which for you is about emotion, and the moon position is all to do with your role in life. And toggling those two polarities has probably proved to be quite challenging, particularly with the cluster of energy, as I've called them, the posse, that were together last year, particularly with Jupiter, Saturn and Pluto all in the sign of Capricorn, but your fourth house, the sector of emotions. So 2020 probably wasn't an entirely easy year, depending on where your sun or your ascendant is and whether it was exactly squaring any of those three positions. But this year, of course, sees the energy from that solar eclipse create a kind of new dimension, one that for you is very much about everyday communication, a bit more excitement, investigation, curiosity, enthusiasm, and that is going to be counterpointed by the solar eclipse that occurs on the 10th of June in your sister air sign of Gemini. So there you go, more air. But the other thing to tell you about is that Saturn, which had spent all but a quarter of last year in the sign of Capricorn for the last 2.5 years, that's now moved into your sister air sign of Aquarius too. And also Jupiter, the planet of expansion, which really doesn't like being in the sign of Capricorn, in transit anyway. It's not so bad in a natal chart, can actually be quite a positive influence in some ways, but it moving into your fifth house along with Saturn is really priming up a superb opportunity. This combination, which was precise on the 21st of December, hasn't happened since 1405. So it's a hugely long gap since whence it last occurred. And that kicked off the Cultural Revolution. And because you have such an appreciation of the arts, colour, textiles, anything to do with the expression of fashion, music, ideas, this is going to be something that really is good for you, these two being together. So that's more air. Also, last year was quite a sploshathon when it came to Mercury. Now, Mercury, of course, is about communication, and Mercury is also exalted in the sign of Aquarius, where we have Saturn and Jupiter this year, and Mercury enables us to assimilate ideas, share how we feel. Obviously, you know, your sign being an air sign kind of gets Mercury a lot, and in fact, your third decan is governed by Mercury. So if you're born in the last 10 degrees of Libra, you're going to be an even more of a kind of mercurial character, very quick-witted, with a real love of learning, travel, higher education and so forth. But this year, the Mercury retrogrades are all in air signs, kicking off with Aquarius at the end of January. We also have a retrograde going on at the time of the solar eclipse on the 10th of June, and then we have a Mercury retrograde in your sign from the 7th of September to the 2nd of November. Now, retrogrades can be trying, Mercury retrogrades can lead to glitches, but for you I think this is going to give you an awesome opportunity to recalibrate your approach to your thinking, your personal expression, your enthusiasm, your joy, the way you are linking to the wider world. Your higher beliefs are definitely going to be supercharged, particularly in the second half of this year. And I think because the energy in Capricorn over the last few years has been so punishing for Libran folk, I just feel that this is going to really give you a sense of feeling enabled, of being liberated, of being set free. And it's not, of course, going to be without its challenges, because yes, Saturn is still about resistance. So it's asking you over the next 2.25 years to work very hard at your love life, to work very hard at your creative, artistic and self-expression. It's asking us to add perspiration to that natural talent that you have. But Jupiter in Aquarius, this absolutely can thrive here. So that's a great opportunity for you. Now, from the middle of January through till pretty well the end of July, the 27th, Saturn is going to be in a square with Uranus. Now, Uranus had been until the 6th of March 2019 and all but 5 months of 2018, for around about 7 years, it had been in your sector of relating. Now, that could have seen some exciting developments around your love life or friendships, or it may have seen you liberating yourself from a tie that wasn't working very well, or it may have pulled you towards someone very charismatic. But since the 7th of March 2019, it has been in your 8th house, which is quite a psychological area. And if you have been sort of experiencing some deep changes within yourself, it wouldn't be a surprise. So one of the issues with Uranus squaring Saturn this year could be that if you're in a love relationship where you feel trapped, or you don't feel very stimulated, or you don't feel very invested in it, or you're kind of going through the emotion or the motions a little bit rather than gaining the real emotion. So if there is a situation which lacks passion around a connection, especially a personal connection, I do think a shake-up can occur this year, and it may be something that you find quite irresistible. It's quite difficult to resist, because what Saturn will do in your 5th solar house, in that square with Uranus, is it will create a set of circumstances where you can't deflect or put off dealing with something that up until now you may have been trying to find some kind of way of deflecting, because the pressure that was coming through that cluster of energy, that stellium in Capricorn, was so intense emotionally. It probably wasn't the time for you to make big changes, because you felt in a more defensive position, and it was about trying to just balance your home existence with your more worldly one. But I think you're going to show much more bravery this year. You're going to move into your own power a lot more, and that's going to be really exciting. But the other thing that's going to be very important about your love life, even friendships, even time management, is that Saturn in Aquarius is going to be opposite the moon position in Leo as the turn of the year occurs. So the solar return has moon opposite Saturn. This is one of the most difficult aspects in astrology. And for you, I think again, it's going to highlight something that isn't working as well as you want. And it may push you again to examine exactly what you really need. And obviously the moon is about our feelings. In the sign of Leo, it's very charismatic and friendly. And it's possible that you may want to move away from friendships that drain you, that don't share your passion and enthusiasm, that don't uplift you, or it could be true of a love relationship. Now, Saturn and the moon is a very complex influence, and it's also therefore important to take responsibility for how we're feeling and how we're manifesting our own imperfections, and not to project them onto others. So that's something else to watch out for this year. But that Venus position, as close as it was or is to what was the solar eclipse on the 14th of December, which forged that awesome angle to Mars, that's giving you, and it still does as we start this new year, the two of them are still together, the planets of love. If you are wanting to meet somebody new, a very serious relationship could head your way this year. That is without doubt. Now, Mercury starts to go backwards towards the end of January. It will go into shadow from the middle of January. But there is a point on the 18th or 19th when Mars, having moved out of Aries on the 7th of January, goes across Uranus. Uranus itself ends a retrograde on the 14th of January. And so if you have been doing a lot of deep thinking about what you want during the retrograde period, which began on the 10th of July, I think that the movement of Mars over Uranus could provoke some kind of extreme event. But I think it's going to be you who is driving it. I don't necessarily think it's going to come from outside. But it could be to do with a financial matter. Something dramatic can happen. You may make a dramatic decision. It could be that you're going to be pulled to someone in a very lusty way and could have a bit of a fling, and it could be really pulse racing stuff. Whether it will stick around or not is another matter. But in a settled relationship that is kind of feeling this moon opposite Saturn stuff, this Uranus square Saturn stuff, it could be a point where you really push back strongly and the other person could be, frankly, really shocked. There could almost be a potential in a very weak tie situation for you to pull it down, a bit like the Tower card, almost overnight, if you get such a drive of instinct and you feel that you have to follow that. But beyond that, that Mercury retrograde, therefore, in your 5th house, does suggest that there could be a lot of thinking going on through to the 11th of March about your love life or about your self-expression. If you're not quite finding the platform to get your ideas out there, this could be a time of frustration, but your drive to do something about it, due to the fact that Jupiter and Saturn are close together as the new year begins, is going to stay there for the whole of 2021, despite the fact that Jupiter does move mid-May into your 6th solar house. Now, I think that's going to be a good transit for you on the whole, that 10-week period, because it's going to bolster you. Jupiter's at home in the sign of Pisces. It's the co-ruler. Now, obviously, Neptune has been there, and at times has been a draining influence for you since 2012, but it has also sort of brought out the most sacrificing part of your nature. But Jupiter being there through to the 27th of July can offer some work and professional opportunities. It does go retrograde from the middle of June, which will be for 4 months, and as ever, the Jupiter retrograde can slow things down. But remember, I said to you that that midpoint in your sign, and also the ascendant being in Libra at the turn of the year, is going to give you a lot of desire to actualize your individuality. And Jupiter's in a part of your chart in Pisces where it's more about thinking about others. So finding a balance between the two may require some toggling. It's known as a quincunx. It's 150 degrees. So your enthusiasm needs to match your individuality. So where you put your energy needs to be something that gives you some kind of return. And of course, Pisces can be distorting, it can be dreamy, it can sort of be a bit lateral. It doesn't necessarily move forwards in a sort of linear direction. So just be conscious of that. But that takes us round to that glorious solar eclipse on the 10th of June, which is going to be conjunct another retrograde, this time in your sister air sign of Gemini. But I feel again, this is about opportunities to travel, to learn, to apply for a course, to do something, to retrain potentially. You may find yourself a bit restless, but because it's squaring up with Neptune, this solar eclipse, and therefore that's the backdrop that occurs for the next 6 months, any expansion that you want to, or any escapism or adventurism that you want to pursue, could see you tormented a little bit by the responsibilities and obligations that you feel to others. And that's really the nub of this year, because I feel you really are being pushed to take your power back. It's whether you can see it through, because your natural need is to be so collegiate, to work so closely with another person. And sometimes I think Libran people can be almost fearful of leaving relationships because it means going back to being solo, which can in some other ways disempower you. But you're definitely going to have some big choices to make on the back of the general circumstances and that particular eclipse. Now, from the 7th of September through to the 2nd of November, you have the retrograde in your sign. So that could see you rethinking one of those individual plans that you set in motion, the strands at the start of the year. But it also brings us to the lunar eclipse of November the 19th, which is all about loot. And it could be about the division of loot if a relationship is finished, or it could be about manifesting the loot that you want to bring into your life. And some kind of high point or key point can be reached in the process. And if you're being a little bit more risk-taking, I think you should salute yourself for it. Remember, your ability to analyse things is second to none, but also is your ability to over-analyse things. And I say this with my ascendant, of course, being at 23 degrees in Libra, next to the fixed star Speaker, which is a great fixed star, to be honest. So that square that was going on in Capricorn for the last few years has really impacted on my ascendant and seen massive changes in my life. So it's possible that massive changes are occurring in your life from that, or were set in train. And I think this lunation could bring it all to the surface. And it's quite lusty, this. So it could bring someone out into the open who really fancies you, or it could be the real deciding point on whether you stick or twist in a relationship that's not working quite so well. Now that brings us through to the solar eclipse of the 4th of December, which occurs in Sagittarius, the second within 12 months. And this is glorious because, again, it's supercharging the third house, which is governed essentially by Gemini energy. The 9th house, where the Gemini solar eclipse occurs for you, is a kind of Sagittarius energy, which is higher values. And Gemini is the quicker, swifter stuff, the text messages, the emails, the banter. It's to do with our neighbourhood, it's to do with siblings as well. It's very fast moving. So a lot more energy is around this year for you, Libra, and hopefully for me too. And that watery set of Mercury retrogrades is gone. Jupiter and Saturn in Capricorn, the 4th house of emotion, is gone. Yes, it's true, Saturn can still apply resistance, obstacles, requires us to be very disciplined. But I think you're going to recapture your drive, your imagination, your passion this year in quite a considerable way. And the eclipse of the 14th of December 2020 really charges the process forwards. The Mars-Venus trine at the turn of the year, the fact that Mars was in a trine with that solar eclipse, 120 degrees, very enabling. It's giving you much more feistiness as you come into this new year. So even if there's something to lose, there's an enormous amount to gain. And I think it's like, we are what we think, as the saying goes. And if your thinking has become so profoundly bogged down in protecting a perceived need for emotional security or to support other people, but in so doing you've lost your identity, that is what 2020 is about for you. A supreme opportunity to gather all your resources together to show what you are, which is a cardinal sign, one of 4 leaders. You're awesomely important. You can't give your energy and power away to causes which no longer serve your greater good. But that may mean taking a leap into the dark. And that's scary. And your natural inclination to think things through could mean zip, the year's gone again. So I think it is a time for action. And of course, when you really get roused, you can display much more of the energy of your opposite sign of Aries when you're really fired up. And because Mars is in, the ruler of Aries is in your 7th solar house as this year begins, I think you are going to demonstrate that this year. You're going to be more competitive. You're going to push back against pushy colleagues. If there are competitors you need to fight against, you're going to be out there on the front foot. And if you want to meet someone new, you're going to be permeating a very sultry message. It's time to reignite the spark after a punishing set of years, really, for Libran folk. And it's exciting stuff, so exciting, absolutely fabulously exciting. But remember, if you want to ascend above this, get your personal blueprint for 21 based on your time, date, place and birth. No 2 forecasts are the same, completely individual to you. Please see the link below. You get 30% off and a character analysis. The rest are $223 or 12 months from the time of the order if you order it in 21. But for now, wishing you all the best. Take care, good luck, and goodbye.